Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Feeling Their Pain: Why Voters Want Leaders Who Care, by Jared Mcdonald. Narrated by Christopher P. Brown. Publisher's Note: This audiobook includes bonus material. Please visit tantor.com and type Feeling Their Pain into the search box. Follow the link to the book's page, then, under the Supplemental Content section, please enter the access code ELECTION, and then click the Unlock button to access the bonus material. The code should be entered in all lowercase letters. All figures, tables, and appendices referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. 1. Introduction. 1.1. Biden and a return to compassionate politics? On August 17, 2020, the Democratic National Convention, DNC, opened in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Known as the Unconventional Convention because of its virtual format amid the COVID-19 pandemic, it sought to cast blame for the ills of the nation on Republican President Donald Trump. The year began with the impeachment and acquittal of Trump for pressuring the Ukrainian president to help Trump's re-election by digging up negative information on the son of his eventual Democratic opponent, Joe Biden. The political and social turmoil worsened with the COVID-19 pandemic, which to date had taken 170,000 American lives, but would claim more than 330,000 by the year's end. The country had spent most of the year in lockdown, leading to business closures and skyrocketing unemployment. And in the midst of this, the killing of numerous Black Americans, such as George Floyd and Breonna Taylor at the hands of police officers, sent protesters to the streets, leading to deadly clashes and thousands of arrests. The message from Democrats on their opening night? The cause of America's pain was a lack of empathy emanating straight from the White House. The president had used police violence to clear peaceful protesters from a park in front of the White House for a photo opportunity in front of a boarded-up church. He had denied and downplayed the dangers of COVID-19, endangering millions of American lives. And he had used his public office for personal gain. In short, the message from Democrats was that Trump was only in office to serve himself. Former First Lady Michelle Obama summed up the sentiment of the evening when she claimed that America was looking for leadership and consolation, but was instead seeing chaos, division, and a total and utter lack of empathy. Obama's message, however, was not simply that empathy was a prerequisite for being president. It was a prerequisite for fulfilling the requirements of American citizenship. Empathy. That's something I've been thinking a lot about lately. The ability to walk in someone else's shoes. The recognition that someone else's experience has value too. Most of us practice this without a second thought. If we see someone suffering or struggling, we don't stand in judgment. We reach out. Because there but for the grace of God go I. It is not a hard concept to grasp. It's what we teach our children. But right now, kids in this country are seeing what happens when we stop requiring empathy of one another. They're looking around, wondering if we've been lying to them this whole time about who we are and what we truly value. They see people shouting in grocery stores, unwilling to wear a mask to keep us all safe. They see people calling the police on folks minding their own business, just because of the color of their skin. They see an entitlement that says only certain people belong here, that greed is good and winning is everything, because as long as you come out on top, it doesn't matter what happens to everyone else. Why did the DNC emphasize empathy? Because in 2020, the Democrats were running the man perhaps best suited to capitalize on an election centered on empathy. Unlike Donald Trump, Joe Biden had grown up in a working-class family, and did not achieve great wealth during most of his adult life. In 2007, after 34 years in the U.S. Senate, Biden ranked 626 out of 639 on the list of wealthiest public officials. Biden's nomination took place at a time not only of crisis, but also of mourning. As a man who had lost a wife and daughter in a car crash and later a son to cancer, he was uniquely capable of connecting with others experiencing loss. That he had suffered from a childhood stutter and routinely offered his personal phone number to children similarly suffering was highlighted at the DNC and served to reinforce the message that Biden could draw from his personal experiences to fight for the little guy. For viewers previously unfamiliar with Biden's compassion, the DNC was not subtle in making this message clear on its opening night. I know Joe because he cares about everybody else before himself. I believe Joe Biden has the experience, the platform, and the empathy to build America back better. Joe Biden is somebody who deeply cares about people who are marginalized, who were being left behind, who are being ignored. Speaker after speaker told stories of Joe Biden comforting the families of fallen soldiers or those who lost loved ones to cancer. Across all 4 nights of the convention, the theme of empathy, compassion, and character was tied to the Biden biography and his record on the issues. In the aftermath of the 2020 election, many who had supported Biden claimed his victory meant a return of compassion to the presidency and a vindication for the value voters placed on matters of character. Fighting through tears, CNN political commentator Van Jones reacted to the news of Biden's victory by proclaiming, "It's easier to be a parent. It's easier to tell your kids character matters. Telling the truth matters. Being a good person matters." Writing for Time magazine, author Stephanie Land wrote that Americans had been bullied by an administration that lacks any semblance of compassion, but that Biden would bring back the dignity in simply being human. In their estimation, 2020 was a test of the character of the nation, and America had passed. In this book, I examine those factors that lead individuals to view politicians as truly caring about people like them. In doing so, however, I note that perceptions of compassion are not as warm and fuzzy as the previous quotes suggest. Unlike the conventional view of compassion as normatively good, perceptions of compassion in politics are self-interested and must therefore be viewed through a different normative lens. At times, perceptions of compassion can be cultivated in a normatively positive way. When a politician claims to care for those who are struggling, those who need help, or those who are marginalized, the compassion being conveyed is inclusive and positive. Yet, perceptions of compassion can also be cultivated in exclusionary ways. Contrary to the claims of Biden supporters, many Americans did view Donald Trump as compassionate, not because he cared about all people, per se, but because he cared about people like them. The argument advanced in this book is twofold. First, I make the case that voters care about the character of their elected officials. They want leaders who are strong and decisive, but they also want leaders who can put themselves in the shoes of the voter and intuit their needs. This assertion is not new, but it often gets overlooked in an era when the conventional wisdom is that deep partisan ties are the dominant force in political behavior and other factors are essentially random noise. I do not discount the importance that partisanship plays in determining the votes of many, but note that perceptions of candidate compassion can play important, often decisive, roles in American elections. Second, I develop and test a theory to explain why some politicians are perceived as more compassionate than others. I argue that compassion is conveyed most effectively to voters through a commonality that binds the politician with the citizen. Just as Biden conveyed his capacity for compassion through his personal experiences with loss, many politicians make relatively universal appeals to voters by conveying aspects of their biographies that make them relatable. I refer to this as experiential empathy, but commonalities can also be conveyed through shared emotions and shared identities. Through shared emotions, politicians convey that they feel the same way citizens do about the issues facing the country. This likely drove much of Donald Trump's appeal in 2016 as he spoke to an anger toward status quo politics felt deeply within the Republican base. And through shared salient identities, politicians convey an experiential link to voters without discussing specific experiences. By sharing a common race, gender, religion, or other important identity, candidates send messages about the groups of people who are likely to be first and foremost in their minds. To be clear, the commonalities I discuss must be relevant for American politics. A politician who tries to relate to a struggling working mother by describing a time he lost a family member may not be perceived as compassionate because the experiences are too disparate. A candidate who is angry not at government, but at some political enemy may not appeal to an electorate who does not share this view. And a woman seeking public office may not be viewed as empathetic by other women if those women do not consider gender to be a salient political identity. As I develop the theory of empathy through commonality throughout this book, I focus on those commonalities for which there is good reason to believe they are politically relevant to at least some, if not all, voters. 1.2. Self-interested compassion. Defining key terms. As shocking as it may be to casual observers who view elected officials as egomaniacal, or at least self-centered, Americans really do want political leaders who are compassionate. Yet, when we hear the word compassion, it evokes heartwarming images of providing shelter to the homeless and feeding the hungry. In the realm of electoral politics, perceptions of compassion are not about altruism, but self-interest. Voters want to know if a politician cares about people like them. In a political system that often operates as a zero-sum game, compassion conveyed to one group may alienate another. This has only worsened in recent years, as social sorting and affective polarization have left Americans so divided that the political opposition has become the enemy. Yet, past scholarship too frequently treats compassion in a politician as an intrinsically valuable character trait, without determining why citizens want it in a leader or examining how citizens go about determining a politician has it. Prior research treats compassion as a trait, something a leader either has or lacks. This conjures a sense that politicians are either saints or sinners, concerned with either improving the lives of the common citizen or hungry for power and prestige. With this research, I view compassion as a state, something that a politician may possess in one situation but not in another, and something that one voter sees in a politician while another does not. Through the importance of commonality, I explain why some politicians are perceived as more compassionate than others, and provide a rationale for why Americans find this characteristic desirable. Central to this theory is the distinction between those candidates who convey sympathy and those who convey empathy. Both sympathy and empathy may be defined as types of compassion or caring, but they are not equal in the eyes of voters. Sympathy is the act that comes with caring for another. A sympathetic person is moved outwardly to help someone they feel needs it. Empathy is the ability of one person to feel the same way another feels, or is expected to feel. Although someone may be empathetic without being sympathetic, and vice versa, these two concepts are closely related. These definitions draw on a hotly contested debate across cognitive psychology, social psychology, and neuroscience literatures. For example, a number of prominent scholars working in social psychology treat empathy as an umbrella term that encompasses both sympathy and compassion. Batson, 1991, discusses empathic concern, which he describes as feeling for another person. Others view feeling for as fitting the definition of sympathy, while empathy is best described as feeling as another, or the ability to take someone else's perspective. For the purposes of the present research, which concerns perceptions of compassion rather than true compassion, it is necessary to distinguish between those emotions that make us reach outward, sympathy, and those that make us look inward, empathy, which is why I differentiate the two and explain these concepts in more detail in Chapter 3. In many cases, scholars find, empathy is a precondition for sympathy. This explains why politicians who convey empathy, as I discuss, are perceived as more compassionate. When a politician seeks to convey sympathy, they will claim to care about Americans or subgroups of Americans and promise to better their lives. Often, this will involve some tangible policy outcome. In other words, the sympathetic politician will focus on the outward action they will take and express a desire to help. An empathetic politician, by contrast, may make similar claims about action, but will find a common bond with the voters that lends her claims credibility. Observers noted that Biden was especially skilled in this regard. During the economic crisis of 2008, while campaigning as the vice presidential nominee, and later as president in the wake of COVID-19, Biden relied heavily on the example of his father's struggles to find adequate employment. "My dad, he used to lie awake at night when I was a kid, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep because he was worried about whether or not he was about to lose his health care or whether we were going to have the money to pay the mortgage." These words showed, as Biden would claim, that he understood that work is more than a paycheck. It's dignity. It's respect. And Biden's empathetic claims went beyond financial or economic concerns. When it was reported that President Trump called members of the military who had died in wars losers and suckers, Biden confronted him on this issue by making it personal. "When my son volunteered to join the United States military as the Attorney General and went to Iraq for the year, won the Bronze Star and other commendations, he wasn't a sucker." By using emotion and making issues of the economy and defense not abstract policy issues but personal ones, Biden conveyed a deeper level of understanding than someone who lacked a direct connection. He chose not to focus on his policy proposals to help the unemployed or military families, but on his personal motivation for providing aid. This commonality suggests that politicians can more easily put themselves in the shoes of another and will be more motivated to solve the problems people face. Yet this conceptualization is, in some ways, counterintuitive. After all, voters are looking for action, which is the hallmark of a truly sympathetic candidate. Yet, the perception of sympathy is different from actually being sympathetic. A politician who claims to care and proposes specific policies to help others may face a skeptical public that understands the incentive politicians face to feign compassion. Instead, politicians who make empathetic appeals will be more successful in overcoming the skepticism of American voters. Empathy, as I explain, can be perceived in various ways. A key feature of my theory is a more expansive conceptualization of political empathy, that involves a classification scheme for how voters come to view a politician as truly caring about people like them, a shared experience, a shared emotion, or a shared identity. Although Donald Trump may have lacked many common experiences to link himself to working-class voters, it was through shared emotion, I argue, that he found a connection with voters who came from financial backgrounds immensely different from his. 1.3. Trump and the Paradox of Emotional Empathy. I'm an angry voter. How about that? I'm angry about the way the country is working for the blue-collar worker. Dave Williams, Cement Finishers Local 179. There are few places that have been more devastated by our trade policies than Pittsburgh. I'm angry at our leaders for being so damn stupid. Donald Trump. Although Biden's victory in the 2020 election fits the narrative that compassion matters, Americans viewed Biden as only marginally more compassionate than Donald Trump. Trump, for the many instances in which he appeared aloof, disinterested, or downright hostile toward the welfare of some Americans, received more than 74 million votes and 46.9% of the overall vote share in 2020. Although these numbers were not enough to win, both Trump's raw vote total and his vote share percentage were higher than they had been in 2016. And this says nothing of the fact that Trump won in 2016. In the aftermath of that election, many political pundits openly questioned how such an outcome was even possible. Critics struggled to understand how Trump could spar with everyone, from Republican Speaker of the House Paul Ryan to a Gold Star family speaking about their son, a fallen U.S. Army captain, and still prevail. Vanity Fair summed up the feelings of many when they ran a column simply entitled, "Oh God, how did this happen?" Yet, for all the hand-wringing and head-scratching that followed the surprising outcome of the election, the quote from union worker Dave Williams helps illuminate an important reason why Donald Trump was able to hold together a winning electoral coalition. Trump conveyed his anger toward status quo politics, an anger that so many Republicans in the past seemed to lack. Many white working-class voters saw in Trump a man willing to fight for the ideals they valued, someone who would not bend to the political establishment. The personal connection that existed between Trump and blue-collar voters might seem counterintuitive at first. Donald Trump was not known for his humble beginnings. Trump grew up in a wealthy family, achieved success in business largely through the help of his father, and had lived his life in the public eye as a billionaire developer and reality TV star. Through his bravado and gold-plated lifestyle, Trump never tried to portray himself as the common man with working-class roots. Yet, for all the apparent disconnect with average Americans, Trump exuded an anger and disgust with status quo politics that connected with people who had backgrounds that differed greatly from his. Of course, empathetic connections with white working-class voters made through a shared anger toward the political world will not appeal to all and can risk alienating other voters who do not belong to those groups. It was Khizr Khan, the father of fallen U.S. Army Captain Humayun Khan, who claimed that Trump was unqualified to be President of the United States because he was without empathy for its citizens. Trump's criticism of the Khan family drew widespread condemnation from both sides of the political divide. Trump's demand for a registry of Muslims living in the United States, his insistence on a border wall, and recorded comments he made regarding his ability to get away with uninvited advances toward women gave many observers the impression he was incapable of compassion toward less privileged Americans. This apparent disregard for others, coupled with his lifetime living in enormous wealth, left him with a limited base of voters to which his anger could appeal. Yet, Trump was facing an opponent in Hillary Clinton who had spent decades in politics and similarly faced questions of trustworthiness. Trump was rich, but it wasn't as though Hillary Clinton was poor. By 2014, Hillary and Bill Clinton had capitalized on their political fame to the tune of roughly $110 million. Furthermore, Hillary Clinton had earned some of that wealth giving highly paid speeches to various Wall Street financial institutions. Her unwillingness to disclose the content of those speeches, and the criticism that followed, cast suspicion on her sincerity and willingness to work for the common person, something I explore in greater detail in Chapter 5. Ultimately, Clinton did not do what Trump or Biden did in 2020. She failed to connect with her audience on a personal or emotional level. While Biden could connect through personal experience and Trump could incite via anger toward the Washington elite, Clinton was part of that same Washington elite. She was, therefore, less able to connect with voters. The appeal of Trump's anger is apparent in the feelings of those who supported him, especially early on in the campaign. In 2016, the American National Elections Studies, ANES, asked voters in the primary how often Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton made people feel angry. Unsurprisingly, a large portion of individuals, around 40%, who voted in the primaries, claimed the leading candidate of the opposing party always made them angry. Figure 1.1, which can be found in the bonus material for this book, shows that anger toward the opposing party's candidate was much more strongly associated with Republican primary voter support for Trump than it was for Clinton in the Democratic primary. Among GOP primary voters, those who said they were always angry with Hillary Clinton voted for Trump by a 2-to-1 margin. In contrast, only 42% of those who said they were less angry with Clinton said they supported Trump in the primary. In the case of Clinton, however, anger played only a modest role. Those who claimed to be angry with Trump did support Clinton at higher rates, 64% to 54%, yet the 10 percentage point gap is less than half the 24 percentage point gap among GOP primary voters. Trump's support was more dependent on the anger he exuded, which connected with the Republican base. Clinton, who did not show that same anger, was far less reliant on it for support. Moreover, when Donald Trump attacked people like the Khan family, and later Alicia Machado, both immigrants to the United States, it served as a signal to many voters that he was going to favor white Americans and white interests over those of other groups. Research on white identity has shown that an increasing number of white Americans see politics in racial terms and express explicit racial bias, largely due to demographic shifts and the sense of threat white Americans feel to their status in society. Trump was able to tap into this anxiety, turning it into anger and benefiting from it electorally. 2/3 of non-college-educated whites voted for Trump in 2016, according to exit polls, the largest percentage for any candidate since 1980. And as I discuss in Chapter 3, shared racial identities constitute an important commonality that shape perceptions of compassion, especially among white Republicans. 1.4. Compassion's importance on voter behavior. Perceptions of compassion are only important insofar as they explain the existence of important features in American democracy above and beyond other factors we already know influence political behavior, such as partisanship. In these sections, I propose a new way of conceptualizing the politics of culpability and consequence. This theory accepts the argument that party ties are central to assigning blame and determining voter choice, yet recognizes that small shifts in the way the public views the particular candidates in any election can lead to large changes in electoral outcomes. I argue that a substantial number of voters cast ballots based on perceptions of compassion, where in some cases the candidate's ability to project an image of caring for citizens may trump specific policy proposals in terms of winning voters. In other cases, matters of compassion can be wedded to specific policy proposals, allowing candidates to tie their...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?